Hello everybody, welcome back to Literature in Robes. It's good to see you again, my friends. Today we are going to be reviewing a book that is by a new author, Gourav Mohanty, The Sons of Darkness. However, it's kind of a book based on a story that has already been told. Something that in Indian culture often happens. A lot of the old histories, the old religious texts, things from prior to Jesus' time are written and celebrated. Culturally speaking, this book is very significant to certain people, Middle Eastern cultures. However, in Western cultures, it may not sound as familiar. So as a fantasy, it may come through as kind of a cool story because it's new, it has new characters and new beats, new plots, all that stuff. But Sons of Darkness is kind of a retelling of the Mahabharata, I think is how it's said, which is an old Indian tale of two families that were in a battle for a throne and power over the land. And basically the story takes place in India and varying areas around the country. And it's a tale of princes and princesses and power grabs and political strife, and it's a fascinating tale. However, my exposure to the Mahabharata tales in general has been a big fat zero. So I have no idea what this story was about, but I found out some from the telling, and it pretty well follows the actual Mahabharata tale poetry, which is like over 100,000 verses made in the 4th century BCE. The characters brought to life in this story were, some were very fascinating. The characters were fleshed out as much as the author could make them while still sticking to these stories. So the plot kind of confines the characters to their traits. And watching an interview, he does his best to try and make these characters come to life, but in a lot of ways it does feel like the author does borrow from Western literature. He is definitely a fan of Western fantasy as well as Eastern fantasy, and you can kind of tell it's bleeding through, almost in such a way as to make it feel like he's kind of borrowing a little too heavily.
It makes me feel weird.
There's a character in the story by the name of Shakuni who is brought to the page in such a way that it almost sounds like he's created Galacta 2.0 from the Blade itself and the First Law trilogy that Joe Abercrombie wrote. In an interview, Gourav Mohanty did say that, it does suspiciously look like he is kind of copying that, but apparently there is a character in the Mahabharata who is a torturer and is involved in this story, Shakuni. So he's kind of a plotter within the shadows. There's just so many commonalities with the character Galacta that it's hard to completely ignore and take it for what it is.
Hey, you know what? It is what it is.
Some of these scenes in the book were slow to fruition. There was a lot of description that seemed kind of heavy, but I believe it was just to fill in the story of the Mahabharata so that it felt as accurate as it could be while also being a faithful fantasy story. It is an interesting tale.
Oh, really?
I will say that the story got better as I kept reading it. I think a lot of the details in the early book were meant to kind of set up these characters and set up the plot. And towards the end, things started picking up a little bit. However, there was not much character development. Again, with having characters, storylines already well known and well plotted, to make a change to that would almost seem like they were taking too much license, and who knows if Indian culture is really attached to that version of the story that to change it would almost make it unreadable to them. But it was really interesting. I felt like I kind of got an education out of this book, at least in learning about Indian culture and the Mahabharata. I believe that that story will continue in a second volume, which I believe he is going to be making. Not a bad first entry. They do have some limited edition, or special edition I should say, where they have some edging printing on here that kind of matches this finish on here, that smoky gold and black coloring. So the second book after this is going to be called Dance of Shadows. That will be following up the Sons of Darkness. I believe that Gourav Mohanty does want to complete his version of the Mahabharata story. So, whoop. So there you have it. Why should you read this? If you are interested in maybe expanding your reading experience and learning about new cultures, especially Indian culture and Indian history, this would be a fascinating way to kind of introduce yourself into that world. It does have a lot of details that are expository in nature, but it is to tell the story as accurately and as faithfully as I imagine the author would like to tell it. I felt like it was a little long-winded, a little too explanatory, and the characters hit and miss.
I made a mistake.
Some were very, very interesting, and I'm very curious to read more about. Others, I could have taken them or left them, either way. However, the book was pretty good. I felt like it was a little bit hard to finish and get through, but I may, when the second book comes out, I may want to read more if I have kind of somewhere I need to break it up a little bit and get some sort of different influenced literature into my brain. So I haven't given up on this story altogether. It wasn't one of those did not finish books, but it was also not one of those that I felt like I can't wait to read the next one. So it's kind of a mid-grade book for me. Again, it was the first entry. It was a story based in Eastern culture, and so for me, not being steeped in that in my upbringing may have made me feel kind of resistant to it. Some of the names, a lot of the names, the places, the characters, the family members, there are a lot of names I am just not used to reading and understanding how to pronounce their names. So that in its own right made the reading experience kind of a struggle for me to be able to go through and keep track of who they were, what role they played, and just remembering the names, because it's not like Joe and Larry and Susan or whatever. It was like, Krishna and Shakuni and Nala and Mati, and those are the easy ones to remember. There was a lot more characters that had just super long names, and long names, and it was just really hard for me to grasp the names and get my brain around them. So that's all on me, though. That has nothing to do with the author, the experience, the story. So there's some hang up that I felt. Not sure if you will. I believe that the story is popular to those that really enjoy Eastern culture and storytelling, to bring the fantasy element to the ancient story of the Mahabharata. I personally couldn't give this book a great rating because of my own personal struggles, but I don't think that is any reason why people shouldn't try to stretch their brain and wrap their head around something new. This would be a good experience for that, especially if you're curious about Indian storytelling and such. So it was a fun story, but I'm only going to give it probably 3.3 robes out of 5 just because of my own personal struggles. It was a really hard book for me to get into. So I would recommend it to those who are curious about Indian culture and Indian history with a tad bit of fantasy. It didn't really have a whole lot of magic or a whole lot of fantasy elements, but again, it is Eastern culture, political. This has a lot of potential to get a lot more involving, but I think as it being his first venture into storytelling, it wasn't something that just gripped me the whole way, but it also didn't give me any reason to just quit it and not finish it. Fascinating stuff. So I'm going to be reviewing some more books. I was reading in between it. Sometimes I would take little breaks from that book to get into a different trilogy, but I'll tell you guys about that in my next review. So with that being said, thanks for watching, guys. Hope y'all are doing good. I hope all is well with you. Appreciate you stopping in and taking time to watch my review. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember, keep reading.